artifacts as potential continuing developments of Congolese heritage. Excuse me. And so each of these sites is very much archaeologists who are taking an interdisciplinary approach where they start by looking at all the amazing amount of work we can get from our colleagues in history, both the history of the transatlantic slave trade and the history of individual cultures such as the Congolese, and to frame questions and to frame narrowing interpretative constraints from those extra lines of research before we even turn to the artifacts themselves. So we're not reading Congolese like identity and heritage off the artifacts. We are inferring Congolese presence in the space based on documentary evidence, finding artifacts that resonate with potential continuation of Congolese practices, and then working from that in an interpretation. So I'm not going to belabor all those extra lines of evidence for each site. I want to show you the artifacts. I also want you to bring to mind everything you've heard for the past day and a half about the Congolese culture, the material forms of supplication, of engaging with the spirits, of just taking sacred space, secular spaces within the Congo and turning them into solemn spaces for oath-taking, resolving disputes, engaging in protection of your household, protection of your village, and healing. Think of Nkizi and Kandi and its characteristics materially, the composition of it. But more so as archaeologists, when we look at these different types of Nkizi, we think about it metaphorically, that we think of the complex cosmological belief system of the Congo, that cultural knowledge is being brought to sites in the America, now in sites of tremendous oppression and tremendous suppression of your ability to practice in different ways. So we ask the question of what could you do as a Congo heritage individual under the grave oppression of enslavement in the United States, for example, how might you practice and develop these in new ways? So we tend to think about the metaphors. Think of the metaphors, think of the key facets of the belief system and how someone could now practice and express that in new ways with different types of materials in typically situations of tremendous suppression. And so a first example is we have a type of pottery that's represented very nicely here in the exhibition called Kolonoware pottery. We have millions of pieces of Kolonoware pottery. It is in the coastal areas of the plantations on enslaved sites from Florida right up through the Chesapeake. This is a type of earthenware pottery that's very easy to make from local clays that's burned at a low temperature, bowls and all sorts of implements that you would use. It's heavily represented in the house and work sites of enslaved laborers throughout the coastal area. So you can see some of the different forms that develop over time. Most of it's 1680 and 1820, some of it continuing on in through the later 1800s. What is more interesting for us is that 26 of these items have been found in coastal estuary rivers right off the banks of the remains of rice plantations. And avocational divers, you see the base of two bowls here on your lower left. These are very small bowls, and you see some photos and representations in the exhibition as well. So these are locally made on these plantations, and for 26 of them, the user has taken it and they've scratched an X into the round base of it. You can see on the far left there, even a sort of directional symbolism has been added to the cross lines within the circular base. And these have been found in the water just off the coast of these plantations, the rice plantations. So 26 of these have been brought to our colleague Leland Ferguson at the University of South Carolina, and he offers the interpretation that we know there was a heavy Congolese presence that was brought into the coastal area, first Senegambians to create the rice plantations, and then an enormous wave of Congolese as continuing laborers, and that what you may have here is an individualized Nkizi has been created by someone. They sacralize the bowl with the cross lines scratched into it, probably placing other objects within the bowl that are metaphorical as to their aspirations, their prayer, their supplication, and then they cast it into the water. And so you have the crossing of this material component of a performed supplication that's crossing the water line as well as a metaphor of requesting aid from the spirit world. So we have 26 examples of that. If you look on the map on your lower right, you see Dean Hall Plantation, a bit up water on the Cooper River. And Nicole Eisenbarger, who's here with us at the conference, and her partner, Andrew Aga, did a fabulous job in just 5 weeks of what has turned out to be a really amazing site for us on diaspora sites. And it's connecting now the coastal area and this Kolonoware Dean Hall Plantation with the inland area you see represented as Edgefield, where potteries will start up in 1815. So the Dean Hall Plantation on your upper left, you're seeing Kolonoware pottery, Dean Hall Plantation, made by African Americans on that plantation. And you can see impressed into it, someone took a piece of wood and created a cross and circle motif and have impressed that into a number of the Colonel-wear shirts. And they have quite a number of these. These are now, this is a terrestrial site. You're finding the production site on a large-scale plantation. This is being done in the 1780s, 1790s. When you move to Edgefield, that you see Scots-Irishmen create new stoneware potteries back in the backcountry in Edgefield to create big storage vessels to sell to all the surrounding plantations. So they're burning now stoneware pottery with a higher quality of clay in the backcountry. And what you see in the middle there, that pottery has the same form of impressed cross line. That's Edgefield 1850, 1820. So the Dean Hall plantation has given us this very nice potential connection that we have Congolese potters first working with earthenware on the coastal area, and then later perhaps being brought up into the backcountry to work on this new form of stoneware production. You also see on the lower right one of the shirts from Dean Hall. This is Colonel-wear in Carolina, and it resonates very closely. There's two of them there. One has a cross motif on the upper right, on the far right hand. The bottom right is one that has a kind of a serpentine geometric form to it on the Dean Hall pottery, and you'll see this in the exhibition. And it resonates most closely with the traditional pottery forms of Congo. One of the questions we ask in the United States is we have Native Americans as well who are mixing with all these different European and African American sites. Is it Native American? And even in this period, we don't have any counterpart of that in the Native American pottery in that area of Carolina. So Pierre has been having very nice conversations with Nicole and I about this terrific connection we're seeing between colonel-wear and the form of pottery known in the Congo itself. Coming back to Edgefield, it is more known a bit better for face vessels developed in the same area. We have large storage vessels that we're now seeing this impressed stamp. We also have Dave the Potter that some of you may be familiar with, who produced these prodigious storage vessels of stoneware pottery, and he would etch cross-line marks on the shoulder of it. And we've been asking questions as to what affiliation or meaning that may be. But then also for Edgefield in 1858, we have very distinct evidence of an illicit vessel comes in, and 107 recently captured individuals from the Congo area are brought up into Edgefield, and no doubt are filtering out into a number of now pottery sites. And right after their arrival in 1858, a very distinctive form of face vessel. And you'll see the three of these on display in the exhibition. These are very small. It's made of the same clay, the same finish as the storage vessels, but with an aesthetic design to them that resonates very much with a form of Nkundi that I've imposed here, of the force of the white eyes, the teeth, a sort of a solemnity and power to the motif. So we have different interpretations of might this be a new form of Nkizi sort of expression in Carolina, or might it be that you've got Congolese individuals of Congolese heritage who perhaps they're not using it as an Nkizi, but it's now an aesthetic form that's moving in new directions, different directions as an artistic form. And not only do we have documentary evidence about the Wanderer, but some of them were actually still alive in 1900, and they were interviewed and they spoke Kongo. So it's one of those moments of very crisp evidence of connections with the Congo. If you move to, for each of these sites, you've got documentary evidence that tells the archaeologists they're excavating in the work or the living space of enslaved African Americans. And you're in a region where the demographic evidence from all of our colleagues in history about the transatlantic slave trade tells us you're in a time period in a region where there was a strong Congolese presence in the people brought in as captives. This is the case in Locust Grove, Kentucky in 1790s to 1860s. In the space of a enslaved laborer's house, these items were brought together in isolated items within the house in a fashion that they couldn't easily be explained as just part of the utility objects you use for eating and the like. So you have a pewter spoon in which an X has been scratched and it brings out the whiteness of the pewter. You've got a white clay marble made on site and an X scratched upon that. You've got a Chinese coin that's been found and held within the house, and by its diamond shape within the circle, it gives you something that looks very much like the lozenge form we've heard so much about in the prior papers of a Congolese motif. You've got glass crystals from a chandelier. These are just manufactured crystals from some small lamp, but they've been heirloomed in a way by this individual and brought together with these other items. So we have the question of might this be some continuing form of a personal supplication using a material component to what would also be a performed, spoken, engaged prayer of protection for the household. This is on display, the Charles Carroll House cache, we call them, as lazy archaeologists. We find these in floors in a concentrated area. We often refer to them as a cache before we give it more robust interpretation. And on the left, you'll see the way it was actually found in place, so that this bowl covered this collection of items. In the exhibit, you'll see it displayed openly, as you see it on the upper right there. And with it, you have quartz crystals, you've got pins and iron nails for the resilience and power of iron. You've got bones with whiteness, you've got quartz crystals and reflective stones for the flash and the character of perhaps a Kolunga metaphor that's occurring. Now the bowl itself is a manufactured item that was found and used as part of this. It dates quite finely to 1770, 1790, produced in Staffordshire, and then an individual was able to take that, see the motif that was part of the manufactured design of the cross lines and think, I'm going to reinterpret this and use it in a different way. And it was used to turn upside down and cap this collection. And it was placed in the northeast corner of a main workroom and living space in the basement of the Charles Carroll House. And that was owned by the Carrolls for a long stretch of time, though we can refine the time range by the pearlware bowl itself. So again, a personal supplication and a personal space for protection, perhaps of trying to exercise some self-initiative in very oppressed circumstances. Also in Annapolis, this is all, both the Carroll House and Bryce House and many others are the work of Mark Leone and his colleagues who have been working there for about 30 years in the urban area of Annapolis. This is later in time, 1860 to 1900, in African-American residents, as you see in these photos. And we begin to see a spatial designation where a secular residential space is turned into a solemn space by placing collections of objects at the north, south, east, and west within the horizontal space of the floor, in much of the same way that when you read Jansen, McGaffey, and all the scholars here, they speak of the way in which you would have daily engagement with the simple form of the Kongo. The Kongo for taking oaths, for the beginning and initiation of a healing ceremony in a private space. And we have a number of sites in the United States where we think we see the designation of an African-American space, and we know it's African-American from other lines of evidence, but that it's being turned into a solemn space by creating the axes of the Kongo. So here you have a variety of objects, and these two are on display here at the exhibition. These are very interesting items, and they go in multiple directions, and I didn't mention these as much in the chapter in the book, and they're not here. You see the penny there in this very tiny hand form. These are quite intriguing. This is a manufactured object again. It is something that's the equivalent of a fastener, a hook and eye fastener or a button. So these are manufactured, and in the 1800s you could go to your local merchant store, there'd be an extra little bin with buttons. You could take them, you could sew it on and turn it into a hook and eye fastener, or you could just sew it onto your shirt or other clothing as an adornment. So it's just a copper alloy that's very simply stamped out by local manufacturers and sold as basically a commodity good. There's another version of this found that you see in the drawing here to the lower left and also in the central figure. This is a watch charm version of it. It's a molded form of an enclosed hand with a loop of wire that would have been on a watch chain. And we have 11 of the stamped versions and one of the molded versions found in sites, again, that other evidence tells us this is an African-American site during the period of enslavement. A very broad distribution, a number of them in Annapolis, Jefferson's Poplar Forest Plantation, the Hermitage Plantation in Tennessee. James Davidson's doing amazing work here with the Kingsley Plantation. I think he's found up to 3 of these now. And that's particularly interesting because the primary ethnic affiliation with Kingsley is a fair amount of documentary evidence that tells us that the Kingsleys focused on individuals of Igbo heritage for their enslaved laborers rather than Congolese or other heritage. But tremendous distribution in these other areas. We've got strong presence of Congolese. If you look at it and run through what might this be, it's in isolation. It's just 1 or 2 of these within the fill of an African-American household. So it's not part of deteriorated clothing or something that would explain it functionally. And so we ask, is this a found item that's being reinterpreted in a new way? So some of the possibilities you could run through that I won't belabor in detail. If anybody would like to talk about them later, I can backfill on this. But you could just say it's just functional, it's just an isolated fastener, it's not that interesting. Christian symbolism could be read into this by the African-American occupant of the site. You could view it as similar to a figa charm, and so there's a variety of lines of ethnicity and also religious beliefs as to the figa. Also similar to the Hand of Fatima within the cultures impacted by Islam, and those are represented geographically in the United States as well. For the Igbo, there is a cult of the hand symbolism of the Ikenga amongst the Igbo, so this may be something that the individuals at the Kingsley Plantation may have been more invested in. But also you could have a variety of punning idioms for the key Kongo terms. So one is just, the form of it might be of interest to someone who is of Kongo heritage, but you also have punning idioms of, just think of the Anglo word as hand, and if you heard that and you were still conversant with key Kongo terms, there's a whole series of words. In Ganga itself, anda, handa, we have in the United States, wanga is a term that is used for a, what would be called a hoodoo or a conjuration item that's now removed from specific ethnic lines, but it's certainly coming from a key Kongo root. As Grigri, a similar term comes from a Mande root within the United States. But it could be there's even just a punning phonetic association of this as symbolic to someone of Congolese heritage. You could also look at the form of it. I showed this to Bob Thompson when I was first looking at it, and he just immediately said, you know, enough with the words, just look at the form. You have a horizontal line that looks like the Kalunga line within a circle, and you have the hand of the operator, the hand of the Nganga reaching to the height of power at the top of the circle. So if you had someone who's still fairly conversant with the idea of the Kinga and all the levels of metaphor, they could just look at it in its physical form and read something very profound off of that. Say, I'm going to hang on to this fastener and turn it into something else, a found form of a personal, dormant and personal sort of religious expression. A site in Texas that's just fascinating. This is Ken Brown and his colleagues, and Ken Brown is one of our most careful. We almost want to counsel him at times. He is so careful and so fastidious in his work. He digs in 1 foot squares. I think about acres when I dig. He digs in 1 foot squares, but the work has paid off. The Levi Jordan Plantation site, he starts a cotton plantation in 1848. By now, international importation of slaves to America is illegal. But he has a sloop. He's located in Galveston, right near Galveston, and his documentary record says he maintains a sloop, and he travels to Cuba a number of times. And within the site, he directs the construction of a barracks-like series of houses for his enslaved laborers, who are operating as enslaved laborers 1848 through the Civil War. And those families stay on in the same space after the Civil War as sharecroppers of the same cotton plantation. And then they're summarily pushed out of the area in 1888 by the heirs of Levi Jordan. And this is almost like a Pompeii site. They leave with such speed that they don't unpack all the material culture that is in their houses. And so when Ken started exploring the remains of these completely deteriorated houses, he found just astounding artifacts. If you look at the house site on the right, he refers to as the Cura cabin for good reason as it develops. It is not a line north, south, east, west, but there's a series of deposits that appear to create the north, south, east, west as one level of metaphor of the Dekenga, turning a secular space into something solemn. On number 1 to the east, you have 3 bases of iron bowls with chalk upon the bowl, which may have been a simple form of a divination sort of tray that you would begin a conversation with the people who came to this healer within this community of this, trying to explore what their problem was. Think of the Nkizi and Kandi, of which there are just exquisite examples on display here. You have a wooden structure. Into the wooden structure are placed contrived nails. You take a piece of iron wedge and you contrive like a knife edge and place it into it as a statement of your supplication and of your solemn oath. Or you could have iron nails as well. There's a space in the abdomen into which you place often Bilongo objects that speak to the crossing of the Kalunga line. He finds in that corner as well a whole series of small contrived iron wedges for which we have no other functional interpretation or description. He finds a very small porcelain doll. You'll see a whole series of these in the exhibition here in different sorts of compositions. It's white, it's reflective, it's resilient, it's of an engaging quality in numerous ways. And he finds the remains of a glass thermometer that would have held quicksilver mercury. Think of the flowing dynamic character of quicksilver mercury. So his interpretation is, if you had an Nkizi that's being created in a new way with the found objects available here, that you would have the only thing that would remain in the archaeological record is the wood would completely deteriorate, and what you would have left would be those wedges of iron put within it as a supplication, and then the more resilient character of the Bolonga materials in the interior. And then down on 4, they opened up the hearth and they placed burned white shells, burned white ash, and a couple of burned nails as the resilience of iron into the hearth, and then sealed it back up. But then when you turn to the west, he finds 3 iron kettles nested together, wrapped in iron chain with an iron bayonet an iron spike, a festival of iron, deteriorated in the western corner of this. Now you could jump and think this is Yoruba or this is Dahomey, this is a personal altar to Ogun. The other one, though, when you think of this connection with Cuba, is just go look at the exquisite work of Jose Bedia, that this is an amulet or prenda or engenga to Zarabanda, and that perhaps one of the individuals that Jordan brought back from Cuba was a practitioner of Palo Mayombe or Palo Monte. And so that we're actually finding a prendas at Zarabanda in the remains of a Brazoria, Texas slave cabin. One of the things we do see here is that these are individualized spaces, they're personal spaces in the United States. We don't see broad public developments. I've proposed elsewhere that when you look outside the United States where there is very close supervision, that you get more social space, such as in Haiti when they are able to rebel. You get the incredible combination of elements of Dahomey, Yoruba, and Kongo to create Odun. In Brazil, you get incredible similar combinations to create the Macumba. And elsewhere I've talked about thinking of this as a form of ethnogenesis that has a certain balance to it that I label as ethnogenic bricolage. I want to close by telling you there's very exciting things happening in Brazil. The Valongo Wharf area, which is to the left of the Redeemer here, is being excavated because of construction going on in advance of the Olympics. And Tanya Andre Lima and her colleagues are working in that area. You can see the construction site, to the left of the construction site, a painting of it. And there's incredible preservation because it was basically filled over with fill after it was no longer in use and they moved the importation place to somewhere else in Rio. And she's got an enormous array of personal artifacts from the individuals who were brought in to that site and were held in place before they were moved off the plantations, including this ivory pendant. This is from the 30 feet down on the Valongo Wharf, and go look at the counterparts directly from the Congo in the exhibition here. Moving into the backcountry, Louise Szymanski is looking at sugar plantations. And this is a conversation just like Dean Hall. He's got columnaware that looks exactly like Congolese style development, and then also these cruciform applications to the columnaware by heavily employed Congolese laborers on the Brazilian plantations. So really exciting stuff coming out of Brazil. I'm editing a journal that we hope to get more and more of the material from Brazil into the Anglophone world. So we'll have a good comparative conversation by archaeologists. But it's the usual challenge of languages we all have, the Francophone to Anglophone to Lusophone. But it's a very exciting period for us in the diaspora, and I thank you for your time.